Can Notre Dame pull it off? Plus, are Alabama and Michigan on upset alert? After last week's disappointing slate of games, this week has too many games to even talk about in one video. Who wins? Who disappoints? I don't know. After all, I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. And with that, I'd like to welcome you to the JSA studio, and I am your host, as always, Nathan. Today, we are going to be previewing some of the matchups that I find the most interesting for this weekend of college football. But before we start my long-winded breakdowns for some of the games that I find the most interesting, this weekend has far too many matchups for me to talk about every game in depth, so we're going to start off by just mentioning some of the matchups that I still have opinions on, but I'm not going to make dedicated segments for. Those games being Purdue versus Wisconsin, Boise State versus San Diego State, UCLA versus Utah, Kansas versus BYU, Michigan State versus Maryland, Oregon State versus Washington State, and Iowa versus Penn State. I'm going to start with Purdue versus Wisconsin and then work my way down the list. So as far as Purdue versus Wisconsin goes, both of these teams have been pretty disappointing for me so far this year. I was high on both of them heading into this season. You can check out my Big Ten preseason breakdown video where I talk about each team and give predictions for the season if you want to double check the fact that I had Wisconsin going 11-1 and I thought Purdue was going to be really good as well. And I still am fairly high on both of those programs going into the future. It's just that this year I think I might have jumped the gun a little bit. I believe very much in both of their head coaches. I think Luke Fickell is going to turn Wisconsin into something that it has never been, and that is a consistent Big Ten championship contender. And I love Ryan Walters for Purdue as well. He's one of the guys that I think is going to exceed expectations at his sort of like mid-level job. And then if a big job gets opened, I fully expect him in 2 or 3 years to be a name that gets brought up consistently for every big opening for pretty much every job. But for both of them, it's not going to be this year that they sort of come out and surprise people. Wisconsin, I still think, has a very good chance to win the Big Ten West. They're not going to beat probably Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. But I think that making the Big Ten championship for the first time in a few years now is a step in the right direction for Luke Fickell. I do think Luke Fickell is going to need 2 or 3 years in order to consistently turn Wisconsin into that team that Cincinnati was potentially, 2 years ago, where they're a real and legitimate powerhouse sort of guy. For my Michigan fans watching this video, I kind of think Luke Fickell is like a football version of John Beilein, because he's taken 2-star and low 3-star guys and turned them into legitimate NFL prospects. And John Beilein did that consistently at the University of Michigan as well. He seems to be, at least so far throughout his career, Luke Fickell appears to be a elite identifier of under-recruited talent. Ryan Walters, we don't really know as much about him, other than I do think he was the reason why Illinois' defense was so good for those 2 years that he was the defensive coordinator. I think that this does still have Big Ten West ramifications. This matchup at least still has Big Ten West ramifications. And I think the Big Ten West has a solid chance to come down to whoever wins this game and their matchup with Iowa later on in the year. Boise State versus San Diego State. This to me is just a really interesting matchup of two consistent group of 5 programs, and those are always interesting to me, especially with the rumors circulating that the Pac-2 now might be merging with the Mountain West in some form. If they do that, then which I think would be the best thing to do for both college football and the 2 teams remaining in the Pacific American Conference, but also all of the Mountain West teams as well. That would be the best case scenario for them, because now they're all Power 5, quote unquote. I'm not sure the Power 5 exists anymore, but they would all be Power 5 programs. Either way, I think this is potentially a very fun matchup to watch, and if there wasn't so many games this week, I would probably put this a little bit higher than other people would. UCLA versus Utah was the matchup that I had the toughest time not really doing a dedicated breakdown for. I think this is a massively important game. I think if UCLA can win this game, it looks like Dante Moore has come into his own now that he's kind of solidified himself as a starting quarterback. If UCLA wins this game, I think they thrust themselves into the, oh, we are serious contenders in the Pac 12 this year conversation. And what I don't think people who haven't been following UCLA closely don't understand about this team, they play defense. They have, according to Pro Football Focus, a better defense than all but two teams in the country. I think they're ranked number 3. I think the only two teams ahead of them are Michigan and Ohio State, according to like PFF group grades. So they damn well might have an elite caliber defensive unit this year to go along with a budding superstar, in my opinion, in Dante Moore at quarterback. Plus, it doesn't look like Utah's starting quarterback is going to end up being able to go. I think we might be looking at a statement game from Chip Kelly and the UCLA Bruins this week. But I still wouldn't count out Utah in either this game or for the Pac-12 championship because we know they have a good defense. They always have a good defense. I think they can run the ball, and their quarterback has been remarkably inconsistent, the backup that is. But if he can be the efficient quarterback that we saw versus Florida, then I think this team would still have a pretty good chance of winning this game. But ultimately, I do think UCLA wins, and I think they win in a pretty convincing manner. Kansas versus BYU, I just think that this is going to be a fun game to watch. Again, it'd be one of those ones where, tomorrow or on Sunday, rather, you look up the highlights and they're pretty entertaining to watch for like a 20-minute video on YouTube. I think Kansas has a serious chance to win this game. I mean, it's at home and they have, I think, probably the best player on either team in Jalen Daniels, their quarterback. And just to be entirely honest with you, Kansas is fun to root for. They've never been good. They had that one magical season when all of football got turned upside down in 2007. I mean, West Virginia was probably the best team in the country that year. That was crazy. But seeing them be good in football is honestly pretty fun to watch. Michigan State versus Maryland. I think this game is going to be closer than other people do. I may be wrong, perfectly willing to admit that I may be wrong, but I think Michigan State is better than people are saying that they are. I just think Washington is that good. I think Washington is a top 5 team in the country, and even against a decent team in Michigan State, in my opinion, I think they're probably right around average for a Power 5 team. They're just different levels, and they had no chance of even competing in that game. And to go along with Michigan State, I think being better than some people are giving them credit for, I also think Maryland is worse than people are saying they are. I don't think that they can upset any of the big 3 teams. I don't think that they have a chance in any of those games, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan, even though I have serious concerns about Ohio State that we will talk about towards the end of this video when we talk about them versus Notre Dame. But I don't think Maryland can play defense. I do think Michigan State is going to be able to run the football and move it offensively. And Tulila Tagovailoa just doesn't impress me as a quarterback. I get that he puts up good numbers and he's had some good games, but when the chips are down, I don't trust him. Oregon State versus Washington State, I am very much going to enjoy watching this game. These are 2 programs that I really, really like. I love both their quarterbacks. As it turns out with DJ Uiagalelei, it seems that Clemson was the problem, not him, which was not something I saw coming at all. I did not expect that he would be able to really improve with just sort of a competent level of play calling. I don't think Oregon State has an elite offensive play caller by any means. I think they're a very talented team with a very, very, very good offensive line, but they don't have elite NFL talent pretty much anywhere on that team. And DJ Uiagalelei looks like a completely different player almost. And Washington State, they look like your typical, from 5-10 years ago, a Big 12 team. They can score on anybody, but they can't stop anybody. Ultimately, I do think Oregon State is going to win that game just because I think they're going to be able to control the ball. But this is going to be really, really fun if either team wins in a convincing manner. I think that they're going to shoot up in the polls to maybe a higher spot than people are expecting them to be. The final game that I'm going to talk about here is Iowa versus Penn State. You could make the argument that this is the third best team in the Big Ten versus the fourth best team in the Big Ten. I think this is the game that we're really going to find out if Drew Allar is that guy or not. Week 1 versus West Virginia, he looked really, really good. Week 2, they didn't play anybody. Last week, he didn't look bad, but he didn't look great either. I think maybe they got caught looking forward a little bit. Illinois is not good. I don't believe the whole narrative that people talked about with like, oh, they didn't look great against Illinois. They didn't look great. You're right, but they were fine. They didn't play a bad football game. Illinois is still a very well-coached team with some serious defensive talent. So I don't buy into that whole concern about Penn State based off of last week. I think they might have gotten caught looking ahead a little bit to this game, but I still think Penn State has a serious chance to win the Big Ten. As for Iowa, they're probably the best team in the Big Ten West. I think they pretty, not necessarily easily, but I think they have a very, very good chance of winning the Big Ten West in spite of a complete and utter ineptitude on the offensive side of the ball. I think Penn State's going to win this game by virtue of the fact that I think Drew Allar or maybe like Nick Singletary or somebody is going to break off a big touchdown run, or Drew Allar is going to hit a deep ball, and I don't think Iowa scores more than 10 points. So I think Penn State's going to win this game, maybe like something like 10-23. I think that's a fairly solid guess on who's going to win that game there. The first game that I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about and breaking down is going to be Rutgers versus Michigan. And not just because I'm a Michigan fan and I like talking about them and I'm probably going to talk about them every single week, but because this is a sneaky upset game. Rutgers is a very well-coached football team that has always played, at least while Greg Schiano has been there, has always played Michigan tough for some reason. Like every team sort of has that team that they sort of are always even with for no reason. Like for Alabama, it's Texas A&M. For USC, it's Utah, even though they're probably clearly inferior programs at their peaks. But for whatever reason, they just always play you tough. And Rutgers, I think, is that for Michigan. I do seriously think that this could end up being just an absolute slugfest and the kind of game where you're watching it and you're like, man, I wish I wasn't watching this, but it's like a close game, so there's still tension. So I don't know exactly where Michigan and Rutgers are at in terms of like their program states. Like this might be the year that Rutgers kind of steps it up and it's just like, oh, we can go like 7-5 this year and make a bowl game and be like a team that you can't overlook anymore. And it could be that Michigan has taken a step back from these past 2 years. And if that happens, this game could be a lot closer than I think people are expecting it to be. Ultimately, I do think Michigan is going to win. I think this game is going to go either one of two ways for Michigan. It's either going to come out and they're going to win by like 10 points because they're going to tack on a touchdown with like 1 minute left in the fourth quarter, or they're going to come out and they're going to absolutely shellac Rutgers because of their performance last week. If they come out and just utterly dominate, then I think that would sort of solidify their placement as the number 2 team in the country right now for the national media and really me. Like I said in my week 3 reaction video that I posted on Monday, when I got to the top 25 part of that video, I said, I can't really justify keeping Michigan at number 2 right now. I'm going to because of what they've done the last 2 years, but I can't really justify putting them at 2. And I still believe that. It's 5 days later. I still believe that. But J.J. McCarthy, I think, needs to come out and sling it. And what do I mean by that? I mean, I don't want to run the ball more than 15 times in the first half. Like, I think you need to let J.J. McCarthy throw the ball 20, 25 times in the first half of this game and say, go have 200, 250 yards and 3 touchdowns with no turnovers at halftime. And if they can do that, I don't know if they will, but if they can do that, then I think it's going to put a lot of my concerns about this team to rest, but also the national perception of this team to rest as well. The spread is Michigan minus 24. Even in a good scenario game for Michigan, I don't think they cover. I think in like a good scenario, I think you're looking at like 31-10 with Rutgers scoring a touchdown late against Michigan's backups. So I don't really see a scenario where Michigan is going to cover. I also think the over-under, I think it's pretty safe to take the under on that. Don't take betting advice from me. I don't bet. But I think talking about these sort of things are interesting. So now we're talking about games that I think are a little bit more interesting to talk about. And that's Florida State versus Clemson is the first one of these next 4 games that I'm going to talk about. Florida State, to me, is a team whose starting 22 has very few weaknesses. I think they have a top 10 offensive line in the country. I think they have a top 10 quarterback. I think they have a top 10 receiving core. I think they have a top 10 running back. Defensively, I think their defensive line has some very, very good players in it. I think the linebacking core is probably the weakest single unit on their team, and I think the secondary is very good as well. The problem is they have no depth. The drop-off from their starting defensive line to their backup players is pretty severe. And if they have an injury in the linebacking core or the secondary, I think you could also see a significant drop-off in the level of play from where they were against LSU to where they are now. On paper, Florida State is a significantly better team than Clemson. Based off of what I've seen out of them this year, Florida State is a significantly better team than Clemson. I do not buy into Clemson putting up 56 points against whoever the fuck they played last week. I also think that their defense has some serious problems as well. I think their linebacking core, which potentially has 2 first-round caliber linebackers in it, has been tremendously disappointing. Jeremiah Trotter went from potentially a transcendent linebacker prospect, in my opinion, to a guy that probably doesn't even go in the second round right now, based off of how he's played so far in the beginning of this year. He can still turn it on and get back into the first-round conversation, but this Clemson team has been fantastically disappointing, and I sort of believe they're in a similar situation to Ohio State in the fact that I think that there are some serious holes on this team that I don't think the national media is talking about for whatever reason. And I think with Clemson, it's less about on the field. With Ohio State, I just think they have a lack of talent at certain positions. But with Clemson, I think it's the coaching staff. I think Dabo Swinney is doing his best to run this program into the ground. His refusal to adapt to the times with the transfer portal, and also just how the offense is ran. Like, they're still running an offense like it's 2012. They're running your typical power spread offense, and you can't do that in the Power 5 nowadays because teams know what that looks like. They know how to stop it. They know how to prepare for it. You have to adapt your offense, and he has been unwilling to do that. I was really high on Florida State heading into this season, and week 1, they didn't disappoint me. I was also really high on LSU, and I still am pretty high on LSU. They have a really, really good chance to win the SEC, but Florida State beat the brakes off of them. They destroyed LSU, completely embarrassed them. LSU looked inept on offense in that game, and I think that was in large part due to the fact that Mike Norvell had this team ready to go. They looked like mid-season form against LSU. This past week against Boston College, I think they got caught looking ahead. Because whether people still want to admit it or not, Clemson is still the standard in the ACC. They might not be after this year, but this year they are still the standard. And they have to win this game if they're going to win the ACC. I do not think that they can afford to lose this game, especially given the fact that Clemson is not ranked and does not look like a very good football team. That being said, the line is Clemson +2, meaning that they only think Florida State can win by 2 points. That is really, really interesting because based off of my opinions on these two teams and what I've seen from them this year, I would put the line at like Clemson plus 10.5. Like, I think Florida State should win by 2 scores. So either Vegas is really off, which doesn't typically happen, or they know something that we don't. That's the phrase that people use, is Vegas knows something that we don't. Why is this line so close and so good for Clemson? I don't know. I don't particularly think it makes a whole lot of sense. I'm not all that concerned about Florida State. If they lose, we will have to have a conversation about it. If they win, I don't particularly think they're going to get credit for it either, because this is an unranked team. Like, yeah, sure, they have a lot of 4- and 5-star guys on this team, but they're not a good football team, in my opinion. So I think Florida State is kind of in a lose-lose situation with them, because if they lose, they're going to get obliterated. They might fall out of the top 10 entirely if they lose. And if they win, I don't think anybody's opinion on them is going to change if they win a close game or if they blow them out. Because if they win a close game, the narrative is going to be, Clemson sucks this year. Why are you playing close with them? And if they blow them out, oh, Clemson sucks. So it doesn't matter that you blew them out. So they're in a lose-lose-lose situation, because even if they win convincingly or just win a close game, it's still going to end up being an L in that column for some people. Ultimately, I think Florida State wins. I think they probably win something like 34-21. I think that's pretty fair. I don't think Clemson has the talent to match up with the wide receivers. I don't think they have the defensive backs in order to do that. I think Florida State is going to be able to pretty much do whatever they want to in the passing game, and that is going to lead them to victory, in my opinion. Colorado versus Oregon is very, very interesting to me, because I think Colorado has the type of offense where they can beat anybody if they get going. Like, literally anybody. They have that level of talent on the offense. Their offensive line has looked absolutely fantastic in the pass game. Shadur Sanders is going to be a top 10 pick in the draft. They have multiple high-level wide receivers. And Edwards, the running back, I think is also really, really good. The defense, on the other hand, is tremendously horrible. And that's probably going to be the difference in this game. Oregon, I think, has a very good offense as well. I actually don't think they have as good of an offense or as much offensive talent as Colorado does, but I think they're more balanced offensively. Colorado pretty much just throws the ball. They don't really run the ball all that much. I think Oregon can pound the ball if they need to complement a very, very good passing game. And defensively, Oregon does have one of the better defenses in the Pac-12, and I think has the potential to pull some stops against this Colorado team. That being said, I do think it's going to be close. I don't think Colorado's going to win in all likelihood. I think Oregon, I just think it's kind of a bad matchup. I think Colorado has a decent chance to beat USC next week, but this week against Oregon, not so much. I just think it's a bad matchup for them. It's almost like offensively, Oregon is built to just decimate this Colorado defense. It's like everything that they do well, Colorado doesn't defend well against. So I do think Oregon's going to win this game by virtue of it being a bad matchup, but I do not see any scenario where Colorado loses by more than 21 points. I think worst case scenario, you're looking at like 14 points, like 2 touchdowns. So I don't understand some of the spreads this week. This one being a pretty good example of that. I do think the over-under has a pretty good chance to go over, though. I do think that this could be a very high-scoring game, even though I do think Oregon is going to win somewhat convincingly. Ole Miss versus Alabama. This is a interesting game for a multitude of reasons. First and foremost, though, is Jalen Milroe is going to start again. Tyler Buchner was the worst starting quarterback of like Power 5 teams last year. He was absolutely horrendous for Notre Dame, and I was extraordinarily concerned for Alabama when reports came out that he was legitimately competing for the starting role on that team. You can go back in time to my original top 25 video if you want to see that. And surprise, surprise, he was absolutely horrible last week. and Jalen Milroe probably never should have been benched. The real question here is for this team is, can Ole Miss the same caliber of defense as Texas? And the answer to that question is fuck no, they can't. If they can't play that same caliber of defense, then I think Alabama's going to win the game. And I do not believe that they are capable of playing that same caliber of defense as Texas. Even though we all know Lane Kiffin is going to be very motivated to beat Nick Saban. If Ole Miss comes out and punches Alabama in the face, which is going to have to be the game plan, in my opinion. Like, if they get the ball first and they march right down the field, score a touchdown, 3 and out the next drive, I would quantify that as a punch in the face. If that happens, I don't know if Alabama can respond, because all of a sudden Jalen Milroe is going to have to throw the ball from the pocket. He's not going to be able to just quick reads or scramble, and they're going to have to move away from the run game probably. So if Milroe is throwing the ball more than Alabama is running, then you can get into a situation where he's throwing a couple of picks like he did against Texas. That being said, even against Texas, there was some poor decision making and some poor play calling that I think cost them some points as well. I don't think that entire game was just on Jalen Milroe, though he was certainly a big part of the reason that they lost. Another big part was that the offensive line just looks absolutely horrid for Alabama, specifically at left tackle. J.C. Latham at right tackle has also not been great. The rest of the offensive line has been okay, but Caden Proctor at left tackle has just been bad. Now, he is a true freshman, I think, but man, I can't believe you don't have a better option than that. He's like a revolving door at left tackle. He ain't stopping nobody from doing nothing. But when it comes down to it, I just don't trust Ole Miss's offense to score enough points to win this game, especially with how Alabama's defense has been playing so far this year. The fact of the matter is that Ole Miss does not have a Xavier Worthy out there. They don't have a Sanders or an A.D. Mitchell out there. And Judkins has not been great so far this year either. I think that has more to do with a step back in offensive line play more than it does with him, but the offensive line has taken a step back as well. I think the receiving corps is worse. I don't think Jackson Dart is a level of quarterback that can transcend all of those things, though I do think they will be able to do things with Jackson Dart with the quarterback run play, allow them to get some big plays or potentially to move the ball fairly consistently. Basically, what I think this game boils down to is Alabama's offense versus Ole Miss's defense. That matchup isn't about Ole Miss's defense being able to play good. It's about how bad does Alabama's offense play. And Ole Miss's offense versus Alabama's defense is not about how good Ole Miss's offense is. It's about how many mistakes Alabama's defense makes. So this entire game is all about Alabama, and if they can just not make the big mistake, then they're going to win this game. I just think there's a difference in talent level between these two teams. So if Alabama can ride it out, not make a whole lot of mistakes, play a fairly conservative game on offense, just run the ball and keep Ole Miss out of it, then I think they should win the game pretty convincingly. And finally, we are talking about what is the game of the year for me. This was always the game that I had circled heading into this year. This is the game that I was most looking forward to, and the game that I think is going to have the biggest ramifications for all of college football. Like, Notre Dame plays USC as well. So if Notre Dame loses to Ohio State and then beats USC, or vice versa, they lose to USC and beat Ohio State, that's going to be a point for people to argue about the transitive properties of the games and the teams and say, oh, a 12-1 Pac-12 team or an 11-1 Pac-12 team who didn't win their conference should get in over an 11-1 Big Ten team who didn't win their conference, because the Pac-12 is better than the Big Ten this year, and we know that because Notre Dame beat the Big Ten team and lost to the Pac-12 team. Now, there's also a scenario where Notre Dame just beats both of them, and there is no transitive property other than Notre Dame is better than both of them. But I think this game is going to be decided by Notre Dame's defensive line versus Ohio State's offensive line. Ohio State's offensive line might be the worst offensive line that they've had since 2010. And I think the offensive line is maybe just a below average Power 5 offensive line. So that tells you how unbelievably good Ohio State's offensive line play has been for the past decade. And as much as Kyle McCord, I think, is a very good quarterback, he is not the type of physical talent that is going to be capable of overcoming the shortcomings of his offensive line. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to run the ball consistently against Notre Dame's defensive line. Because if I know one thing about Notre Dame and Marcus Williams' defense, is that they are fundamentally sound and they are not going to make things easy for you. And I straight up do not believe Ohio State's offensive line is going to be capable of overcoming that. I think I think you can make a very convincing and very strong argument that Notre Dame's defensive line is maybe the most underrated group in the country. They have tons of talent along that defensive line and they're fundamentally sound. They don't have an Isaiah Foskey level of player on that defensive line, but they do have solid depth and they can rotate players in and out without losing a whole lot. So the matchup of the game is going to be Notre Dame's defensive line versus Ohio State's offensive line. But if Kyle McCord had last year's offensive line with two top 50 pick caliber offensive tackles and a pretty good center and a Donovan Jackson that was actually playing well, then I think he could be putting up numbers similar to what CJ Stroud put up last year. I have little doubt in my mind that that statement is true, but the offensive line, to me, is just straight up missing the talent. I don't know what's going on with Donovan Jackson. I thought he was going to be a first-round caliber guard. He isn't. He's been absolutely horrendous so far this year. The center play has taken a dramatic step back, and Josh Simmons at left tackle, as much as I gave Caden Proctor shit in the last section, Josh Simmons has been significantly worse than him. Josh Simmons, I think you can make a serious argument, is the worst left tackle in the Big Ten. Like, I don't think you have a skill issue on the offensive line. I think your offensive line coach is a really, really good coach. I don't think you have a skill issue. I think you have a talent issue. I just don't think you have any good offensive linemen. Well, you do have good offensive linemen. Fryer at right tackle has actually been playing at a pretty high level, and your right guard has at least been above average. But the rest of the offensive line has been severely disappointing. Now, defensively for Ohio State versus like Notre Dame's offensive line and running game, the front seven, I think you could make an argument, is the best in the country for Ohio State. Like, it is one of the best. There's no arguing there. But you can make the argument it is the best front seven in the country with a tremendous amount of NFL talent along the edges and along the interior even of the defensive line, and in my opinion, the best linebacking core in the country. The problem is, I think Austin Estime might be the best running back in all of college football so far this season, and Notre Dame might have the best offensive line in the country with multiple high NFL draft picks along that offensive line, notably Joe Alt at left tackle. So I actually think that Notre Dame has the talent at those position groups to actually match up with your defense, even though it's arguably the best front seven in the country. It's the secondary that is very concerning for me. I think Denzel Burke has taken a step forward, but I still don't think he's an elite corner. Opposite of him has also been somewhat disappointing so far this year. Whoever it's been out there, either there's kind of been a rotation out there, but none of them have particularly stood out or played well. And your safeties are a massive question mark because you haven't played a team that has been able to test you vertically. I think Sam Hartman is going to test you vertically this year. Another dirty little secret of this team the past 2 or 3 seasons has been you don't have really the ability to rush the passer. It's the same thing with that I've talked about with Michigan's defense as well. They might statistically be very good, but when you play an offensive line that can seriously pass block at a high level, you haven't really gotten to the quarterback. I mean, JT Tuimoloau, I think, has the potential to be a top 10 pick, but he had 3.5 sacks last year, I think, total the whole year, and 2.5 of them came against Penn State. He wasn't an elite player last year, and so far he's been pretty much the same story. He's been pretty good against the run and kind of disappointing against the pass. Now, he's still an extraordinarily physically talented player, and maybe he's just been waiting to turn it on. You can make that argument if you want to. But I think the problems are actually deeper than that. And that's that I have no faith in Mike Knowles as a defensive coordinator. And I've said this in several videos talking about Ohio State and their defense. I think Mike Knowles is your version of Don Brown for Michigan. Like, I think Don Brown's defense at Michigan essentially boiled down to, if we're playing a team that we are physically superior to, then we're going to dominate and utterly shut them down. But if you play a team that can actually take advantage of what the scheme's weaknesses are, which Notre Dame can and Michigan can, you saw that last year, then he can kind of fall apart, and basically the defense just becomes like water going through a strainer. Like, it just passes right through you. That was the story with Don Brown, and against Mike Knowles, that's also kind of been the story. You know, last year you played, I would say, probably 3 top 30 offenses in the whole country, in Maryland, Michigan, and Georgia, and you gave up like 45 points to Georgia and 45 points to Michigan, and I think Maryland had like 35 too, because they actually had the talent necessary to take advantage of some of the scheme's weaknesses. And I think Notre Dame is more talented than any of those teams last year. However, you are in year 2 of the scheme. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm perfectly willing to admit that. I don't think I am, though. So, for Ohio State, what are the keys to this game? The number one key is, if he is healthy, don't dick around with all these other running backs that you have. Feed Mayan Williams. He is your best running back by far. It is not a conversation. He needs at least 25 touches in this game, because Notre Dame is going to be able to be physical with your offensive line. They are going to at least somewhat limit the running game. And if you don't have the running game, then the play action isn't going to work, and Notre Dame is going to be able to pin their ears back and rush against that weak offensive line and potentially get Kyle McCord out of his comfort zone as a quarterback. And you can't let that happen. I don't think Trainum is the type of running back that is going to be able to handle a workload right now. And Travion Henderson is not the kind of running back that you want to be giving 20, 25 touches a game to. And Mayan Williams is the type of running back that is going to get better the more you give him touches. The more he carries the ball, he is going to become harder to tackle for this defense and can grind away some yards, especially later on in the game if you have a lead. Travion Henderson is not the type of back that can do that. Chip Trainum is not the type of back that can do that. Those are explosive zone runners. Mayan Williams is a power back. He is going to go north and south, and he is going to run people over. Feed him the ball. Defensively, you've got to take away the run game. That is the first priority. That might be your only priority for the game. Do not let Austin Estime break the big run. If you do, this is going to end up being a long game, because if they have the play action and Sam Hartman isn't just back there slinging it, if they can do their whole offense, then you are not going to stop them from scoring 40 points. And I do not think your offense has the ability in this game to match them pace for pace if they've got their whole offense at their disposal. if you do prevent the big play out of Austin Estime and you do stop the run early on and you tell Notre Dame you're going to have to throw the ball to win this game, then I think you can have the advantage defensively. Because Sam Hartman has put up great numbers before, but the fact of the matter is, several times throughout his career, he has had the opportunity to lead a game-winning drive, and he has been unable to do it every single time. So for Notre Dame, your biggest thing that you have to do is establish the run. And the second biggest thing you have to do is convert on third downs. If you can get some drives together and wear this defense down a little bit, that is going to help you out tremendously. On defense, you have to stop the run and make them throw the ball so that you can take advantage of the poor pass blocking that this offensive line has put on tape so far this year. But let's go backwards here. Let's go back to the offense here real quick. What do I mean by establishing the run? Well, I think Ohio State is going to try to do to you what they tried to do to Michigan last year. So I think you need to do what Michigan did last year, which was they didn't really run the ball a whole lot in the first half. They kind of just threw the ball. Like, they ran the ball quite a bit. Like, I think it was close to 50-50 because that's how the game of football works. But they used the passing game to set up the running game. And all of a sudden, after they proved that they could throw the ball, they couldn't put 8-9 people in the box anymore, which allowed Michigan to run the ball in the second half. And that's when the game got out of hand. You need to do the same thing. You need to come out and sling it. You need to prove that you can throw the football. Like, the first play of the game should be like a hard play action that you throw over the middle of the field to like your tight end or whoever, and you get like 15-20 yards on it. That should be the first play of the game. Defensively, as I said earlier, you have to stop the run. Now, there's a very good chance Ohio State isn't going to let Mayan Williams run the ball, so you're probably going to have a pretty good chance of stopping the run anyway with Travion Henderson or Chip Trainum back there. But especially if Mayan Williams gets into the game, you've got to stop the run. They hit you for a play action early on in the game, maybe you back off a little bit. But you should still focus on stopping the run, because if they don't have the run to go to and they're just going to throw the ball the whole game, then you'll be able to rush the passer and I think get home quite a bit, because Kyle McCord is not the kind of quarterback who can move around the pocket and extend plays athletically. He just doesn't have that in him. And the offensive line has not been good so far this year. So I think you have to stop the run and force them to throw the football, which is kind of funny because they have the best receiving core in the country. But I don't think they're going to have time to make those throws to get down the field, because even though they put up 63 points last week against Western Kentucky, if you look at their big plays in the passing game, they were all on like two-man routes with max protection with like 7-8 people blocking and 2 people running down the field. So I don't buy into that offense at all. My prediction for this game might come as a surprise to a lot of people, but I think everybody saying Ohio State is going to win this game is doing it off of hope and just understanding that on paper they are the most talented team in the country. And from what I have seen out of these two teams this week, so far this season, I do not believe Ohio State is a better football team. I think Notre Dame is a better football team, and I think they are clearly a better football team. Plus, I don't think people are accurately taking into account home field advantage for Notre Dame. I think South Bend is going to be rocking this week. I think Marcus Williams needs a program-building win, and I think this is it. Notre Dame's offensive line, I think, has the ability to match up with Ohio State's defensive line, so I think they will be able to go to the running game, and I think Sam Hartman is going to be efficient with the football, and he's going to somehow, even though he doesn't have a big play, somehow going to end up with like 275, 300 passing yards, and you're like, how did that even happen? But that's what I think is going to happen. I think it's going to end up being Ohio State 24, Notre Dame 34. And unfortunately, that is all that I have for you today. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you to like if you liked the video, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagree with me at any point in the video, or if you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment in the comment section below. But let's keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole, and I'll see you next time.